Okay, it is a dreary, rainy day here in the Pacific Northwest, and I am very happy about it. And it makes it perfect for me to talk to you about Pine, which I just finished. So I went camping last weekend and I tried to finish this there, but so much stuff kept happening that I did not have a lot of time to read. And I'm not used to sleeping in tents, so I was exhausted. And every time I laid down to sleep, I was like, oh, I'll read for a little bit, and then I just passed out. So Pine. I'll show you some of the clips from camping of me trying to talk about this while I was being accosted by yellow jackets. Pine. This is a Scottish Highlands crime thriller, apparently. I had to move again because they seriously will not leave me alone and I am terrified. So but I finished this recently and I really enjoyed this. I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it. I think it is not published here in the US. I think it's only published by the UK publisher, which is it's Penguin UK. On the back of this book actually has like the price in pounds and Penguin UK. I got it used at Half Price Books, so I don't think you can buy a US version of this book yet. So I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it, and reviews are kind of mixed online. On Storygraph, I haven't looked on Goodreads, but on Storygraph it has about a 3.5, and I can kind of see why, and I might get into that, but for me this was a solid 4. I really enjoyed this. I just really enjoyed it. I've been talking a little bit lately about wanting to find a Pacific Northwest Gothic, like, because you have Southern Gothic and you have Midwestern Gothic, and I know there are things that are Pacific Northwest Gothic, and I've mentioned this before. I think shows like Midnight Mass and Twin Peaks are very Pacific Northwest Gothic, and I want to find some books with that. So it's very interesting to me that I found a Scottish Highlands Gothic book that felt very Pacific Northwest Gothic. I mean, don't get me wrong, this has a lot of Scottish stuff in it that makes it different, but the vibes that I'm looking for, I need a book like this set here in the Pacific Northwest, which is part of what Lies in the Woods did for me. Even though it wasn't a Gothic, it was very Pacific Northwestern-y. Anyway, let me tell you about Pine by Francine Toon. So this is a Scottish Highlands Gothic. It's advertised as a literary Gothic thriller, and I actually don't think it's much of a thriller, but I'll get into that. So on Halloween night, Lauren and her dad Neil. So actually, quick aside first, we're going to talk about this pronunciation. So Niall is controversial on how you pronounce it. I looked it up because I was pretty sure that it was Neil, and then I was like, no, it's got to be Niall, right? And it is both. It's both, and it depends on which country you're talking about and which origin of the name you're talking about. So I found a couple of like Reddit threads of people arguing, and like Irish people are very much like, no, it is Niall, and Scottish people are very much like, no, it is Neil. So it really depends. So I'm gonna go with Neil because we are set in Scotland, and Neil is a very Scottish man. It doesn't mention his family coming from Ireland or anything like that, so we're going to stick with the pronunciation of Neil based on the research I did and asking my friends whose family came from the islands, not the Highlands, but Scottish islands, and I asked him, and he was like, I have always heard it Neil, but I've only met 2 people with that name. So the dog is trying to figure out where I am. Okay, so we're gonna go with the pronunciation of Neil. So Lauren and her father Neil are driving home after trick-or-treating, and they come across this woman in the road, and she desperately looks like she needs help, and Neil kind of goes into this weird fugue kind of state and gets her in the car. Lauren's really uncomfortable. She's not sure what's going on. She's only like 10 years old, and she's like, I have no idea what's going on. This woman looks clearly injured. She definitely needs help. And Lauren's very worried because her dad is not explaining anything to her, but it seems like he knows this woman. So that's kind of where the story starts. And I was like, oh, I am hooked. I'm hooked. And we kind of continue to follow Lauren, and this woman kind of disappears the next morning. And Lauren is like, what the hell happened? And this is chapter 1. So essentially, this is where the story starts, and it does not kind of keep that momentum. That gets kind of put in the back burner. We end up spending a lot of time with Lauren and Neil and in this small rural village in the Scottish Highlands in November. And Lauren is being bullied at school. She's never met her mom. Her mom disappeared when Lauren was a year old. And as the book unfolds, we figure out that a lot of people in the village have always blamed Neil, and they're kind of convinced he has something to do with it. And Neil is not doing anything to stop them from thinking that. He is a heavy, heavy alcoholic. He spends much more of his time drunk than sober, oftentimes neglecting Lauren to the point where she ends up spending most of her time at the various neighbors' houses. And this kind of ends up with her being bullied in the school for sometimes she comes to school in clothes that are unwashed because her dad hasn't done laundry in forever. Her house smells a bit musty. She doesn't have a lot of money, so she ends up wearing things that end up with holes in them and are from hand-me-downs from thrift stores where other kids recognize their clothes on her. She's just not having a good time in this school. She has one friend, and she has a couple of older girls in the school who kind of protect her because they're from her little neighborhood in the village. They know her situation and they feel sorry for her, but also she's just a lovely girl. She's just very nice. She's very kind. She's very accepting of everybody, and she just really wants to be a part of things. So these older girls end up kind of protecting her a little bit, which was really kind of a nice dynamic to see, because so often in books and reality, girls are mean to each other in these types of situations. So, and in fact, some of her biggest bullies are other girls her age. So it was really nice to see like older girls kind of being an older sister to her when she doesn't have any. But Neil is Neil is an adventure. He's also got an anger issue, and Lauren talks a lot about how she has to kind of tiptoe around his emotions. She knows things she can't ask him. She knows what kind of tone he takes when she needs to stop asking him questions. And that kind of added to this whole like tension feeling throughout the book, because you started to be really worried about Lauren and what was going to happen to her. And did her dad actually do something to her mother and we just haven't found it out yet? Are we trying to are we going to uncover something? Is Lauren going to be the one to uncover something and have her whole world shatter around her? Because Lauren kind of starts looking for her mother and looking for things about her mother in the house, things that she's not allowed, and Neil's alcoholism is like really ramping up. So this is kind of the situation that we're in. And in the meantime, we're spending all this time out in the woods with Lauren and her friend Billy. They're like building a fort. All these weird kind of supernaturally things are starting to happen. A bunch of people in town are starting to see this woman coming out of the woods, and they think she looks really familiar, but they forget her the moment they look away, which was an interesting situation to have. Okay, had to take a quick pause. So after we spend a lot of time kind of building these characters, getting to know them, and just spending time with them, which is something that I really love in these types of books, and actually in books in general, I really love spending a lot of time with the characters, and that's really what we're doing. In that way, it ends up a little more literary than it does like a straight horror or a straight thriller. There's not a lot of kind of suspense in this book, which takes away from the thrilleriness feel for it. For me, I really don't think this is a true thriller. I think this blends a lot of genres. So one of the older girls in the town ends up disappearing, and it's revealed that she's been looking into Lauren's mother's disappearance because she knew her when she was a child. Lauren's mother was not very old. She was only like 20-ish when she had Lauren. And so some of the younger girls in the village remember her as like babysitter and things like that. So this girl, I think she's like 17, she ends up going missing, and we spend a lot of time looking in the woods for her, and then everything kind of gets revealed in the last 2 chapters, which was very quick and rapid fire because the chapters get shorter as you go on. The first chapter is like 60 pages, and then the chapters get shorter and shorter, with some even being like 3 pages. So it kind of starts picking up the pacing that way, but things are not happening very quickly. I think that's kind of why this has lower reviews, is the pacing was a little weird, but I loved so much of this. So the ending was definitely a problem, with everything just like quickly happening and wrapping up, and I was like, oh, so that kind of dropped it down because I was feeling 5 vibes up until the end. But I don't think that ruins it, honestly. I think that type of ending isn't necessarily a problem for the type of story we were getting. We were definitely getting a story that was spending time with these characters, which is why I say it's a little more literary than I think it is like thrillery. There are elements of horror because we have a supernatural element happening throughout the story. We have this ghost character showing up. We have things moving. We have, at one point, there's like a mythical folk creature that shows up for like a split second, but it's definitely happening. Lauren's also really into tarot cards because she finds out her mom was, and they've got all these like kind of witchy, occulty books in the house. And Lauren learns how to use tarot cards, and so she actually does a reading for herself. She gets some cards, and I'm very congested this morning. I apologize. I had to pause for a second there and go blow my nose. Okay, so Lauren, she's really obsessed with like tarot cards, and she does this reading, and I won't reveal what the cards are, but it was a very accurate depiction of tarot, including using playing cards when you don't have an actual deck, and how the playing cards can be translated to the different suits in the tarot deck, which I thought was really interesting to include. I love it when books do accurate tarot, and I really hate it when they do inaccurate tarot. So oftentimes you'll have the death card showing up and everyone freaking out, and death is just a change card. It's not an actual death card, it's change. And so we do have, I think we have the element of the tower coming up at one point, which is a big foundational change, and we have conversations about other cards, and it was really interesting her seeing the connections of the people in her life to this 3-card spread that she did. She also talks about how she uses the cards, like what questions to ask and questions not to ask, and that was really interesting. I was like, okay, this person knows what they're talking about with tarot, which was very nice to have like accurate tarot depiction and not it just being like spooky occult girl, like Wednesday Addams loves tarot cards type of like thing where people don't know any like no shade to Wednesday Addams, I love her so much, but that's the picture you honestly get. You usually get is Wednesday Addams, Lydia Deetz, and tarot cards, and it's like, well, I love those two girlies. There's no connection with tarot cards with those two pieces of media. So, moving on. I don't want to talk about like what the spoiler is with this one because I think it's a big part of the book, and I don't want to discourage people from reading this, but there is like, it's not revealed in like the best way. The thing is if you're reading the book, you can pick it up through context clues. There, you definitely get a lot of it was probably this person type of feeling, but you also get a something's up with this person type of feeling about it. So it definitely makes you kind of question everything because we're viewing so much stuff from the view of Lauren, who's 10. There's a lot of unreliable narration, and then we also get a lot of narration from Lauren's dad, Neil, who, because he's always drunk, is also an unreliable narrator. So there's a lot of unreliability in the conversations that we're having, which was really, really interesting. And I definitely enjoyed that part of it. The biggest part for me that I really, really enjoyed, and I think will probably throw some of you off if depending on what types of media you've read or engaged with, the dialogue in here is heavily in Scottish slang. There's a lot of use of cannae, dinnae, like ken, like there's so much of that in here, and the sentence structures for the conversation style is extremely, extremely different, and I really enjoyed that. It made me miss my time in Scotland, but the rhythm of speech is vastly different, so it was kind of jarring for me at first to settle back into it because I haven't heard that rhythm of speech in so long. I've been talking with my friends over text for the most part, so to hear that rhythm of speech where this is very unfiltered, because when one of my friends, she talks about how she uses her Sunday voice a lot when she talks to me, and so she changes a lot of things about her rhythm of speech, her intonations, the use of slang words so that I wouldn't get lost, and she got more and more using it the longer I lived there, but it is very hard to understand people when you first get dropped in, and that was just in like a major city. The higher up you go, in the more rural you go, the more the slang gets, and so there was a lot of things in here that were very interesting to read in that tone and rhythm and pattern of speech that I really enjoyed. There's also a lot of conversation in here, or mentions, not really conversations, a lot of mentions in here of like Scottish folk music and how intrinsic it is to education. And I think if you want something that's immersive in a culture, and if you've read a lot of like small town stuff, you know that rural towns and small towns have their own culture apart from the culture that makes up the greater part of their country or their region, and it's very much a subset, and this feels very immersive in that subset of culture. Francine Toon, I believe it said that she used to live, she grew up in Sutherland and Fife, which is not as far north as this book takes place, but it's still very much close to there. It's likely she has family and all that stuff. And so she definitely wrote from her knowledge of those areas, so it feels very authentic in its style of writing. It's not judgy about the type of places that people live. We're talking a lot about old houses. Lauren's house is very drippy, it's very leaky, it's very moldy, it's very run down, and a lot of that comes from her dad being an alcoholic, not necessarily from the region she's living in. But when she goes and sees her friends who have well-kept houses, we're still talking about these old houses up there that have tartan patterned flooring and like wood paneling walls, and everything's kind of old, and there's no judgment in that. It's just very much setting an atmosphere of this is the environment that people live in. So I don't know if I explained that very well, but if you really like something that's heavy on vibes and character work, I think this book would really do it for you. And it's something different that we don't see a lot of, especially recommended here on YouTube, or I have not seen this on social media. I got this because I think I saw Books and Lala mention it one time like a year ago, and I put it on my TBR, and because it was set in Scotland, I was like, I love things set in Scotland. I love Gothic feeling things. I'm gonna look for it, and I just happened to find it at Half Price Books this year. Other than that, I have not seen this book mentioned. It doesn't have a whole lot of reviews. I'll pop up like how many it has here. It is bigger in Scotland. It has won some awards. It's been mentioned by The Guardian, by the Daily Mail, the Scottish Independent, the Sunday Times. Like it was fairly big in 2020. I really enjoyed it, and I really think it's worth giving it a try, especially if you're spending any time out in the woods. I think it can be a fun little thing to read while you're sitting out or going into winter when everything's starting to be drippy and wet. There's a lot of forest and fog and mist and ferns, and it was just a lovely a lovely time reading this very sad, depressing book. But that's all I've got for you today. I'm gonna get back in touch with you very soon. I've got some things I'm working on, and I just got a library hold come through for giving an author her third and final try, and I cannot wait to talk to you about that.